So hello everybody and welcome back to another Blender tutorial. Today I want to continue what I was talking about in the last video where I was doing biology animations, namely the red blood cells going through the vessel, and this time I want to do a different biology animation. And I remember from class there was the bacteriophage animation. It was this classic like thing that kills the bacteria. It's a virus, and I think I also saw it in a Jimmy Neutron. Either way, I'm going to be showing you how to make this thing because it's mostly animation and rigging, which is something I don't normally talk about. So it's not really about rendering, but we'll include it a little. So let's make this thing. There's a lot going on. There's the moving legs, there's the moving body. How are we going to do it? Well, the first thing we want to do, of course, is bring in a little reference. So what I did is I downloaded an image of a bacteriophage. This is cursed, of a bacteriophage right here. And then I'm just going to rotate it so we can see it and put it in look dev. This is what we're trying to make. Basically, it has this enclosure with some genetic information inside, a pillar. I don't remember biology. Either way, let's make this thing. The first thing I want is this spiral. And to make this, there's actually a very useful add-on, so make sure to go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and make sure to go to Extra Objects and enable Extra Objects Curve, okay? If you don't do this, you're not going to be able to do what I'm about to show you. Shift-A, go to Curves, go to Spiral, which is the additional curve that came from the add-on, and click Archimedean Spiral. There's different kinds of spirals, and it's related to how much it grows. Because we're looking at it from the side view, it just looks like a line, but don't be deceived. We can add some height to it, and now you can see or imagine how it's a spiral. So I want it to be pretty thin, and I want it to have a lot more rotation, so I'm going to bring that up to 10, and then crunch it down with the height. So you can see I'm basically making a coil here. And you can modify this at your leisure. I'm going to make that 25. You can play with this, but the thing is, once we bake it in, it's baked in. Although you could do it procedurally. Okay? So there we go. We have a curve object that is a spiral. To turn it into actual geometry with thickness, just go to the curve menu, go to geometry, and best trick ever, in bevel depth, you can just increase that, and that will give your curve a sweeping profile. Okay? So that is how we make the spiral. First part of this is going to be modeling, then we're going to animate it. Okay, next part is this head thing. You could model this, or in my head, it kind of looks like a icosphere of low subdivision. You can see how that kind of looks similar, so I'm just going to use that shortcut. So I'm going to scale this down, scale it up on the z-axis, maybe a little more thickness here, and there you go. That's the head. Another thing is I'm seeing this kind of donut-y shape. The collar. Can you imagine these things actually crawling around inside of you? It looks like this like tidy gentleman man with a spider feet. To make that part, I guess I'm just going to use a torus, right? So I'm just going to take that torus and position it there with a bit of height. That looks pretty good. And I figure we can take both of these and join them together. So that's Control J, and now it's a single object. Okay, so we have the top half of this completed, and before we start modeling anything else, I know this has been a boring tutorial, so I want to add some interest. In other words, some animation. For this coil object, we are going to turn it into a mesh. So right now it's a curve with thickness. Run a convert to mesh command. The reason I want to do this is I'm going to apply a modifier that only works with meshes. So in modifier, go to simple deform and add a bend modifier. Why a bend? This is going to be the way we're going to animate it, kind of like it's a jiggly neck or something like that. Is it biologically accurate? Don't know. Don't care either. Now the issue with this, by the way, is you're going to see as I bend this, the head doesn't move with it. So you're like, no problem, I'm just going to parent it. And you think this will work. Let's see what happens. Doesn't work. The parenting doesn't matter because we're actually just doing a modifier change, not the actual object. So that's not going to work. So then you're thinking, okay, there's another way to parent. I can go into edit mode, select a single vertex, and then hit Control-click on this object. So I'm selecting a vertex, then control clicking this object, and then control P to parent, and then there's something called a vertex parent. If you didn't know, this is parenting to a single point of the other mesh, and you think this would work, and it kind of does, but you can see we're bending it, but the head isn't turning, right? It's always facing upward. So that's not going to work either. Here's a trick that I hope you love. Here's how we're going to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to select a single point, but in fact, I'm going to select 3 points. So let's do one here. I'm just like picking different areas, one here and one here. So I want you to imagine we have 3 points that are making a triangle. You're going to select 3 of these, and then you're going to hit Control click on the object again, and then you're going to Control P, make vertex parent. What has changed this time? You can now see, as we change the angle, if I can do that, the thing is actually turning now. The way this works is the multiple vertex parent allows it to compare it to each other, these vertices, so it can actually gauge rotational and scaling information and stuff like that. Now, I don't know if you can make a vertex parent for multiple. I think it's maxed out at 3. But you can see that looks pretty good. Okay, so that is a thing we can animate. And before we like add animation, so basically we've just rigged this thing so we can animate it later. Before we do that, I just want to finish the modeling super quickly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit L on this torus to select linked. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to separate it into its own object. Separate by selection. So now we have another donut, and I'm just going to center its origin. So this is the donut at the end. I call it the bottom collar. And I also want a base for these little feet. Okay? For this, I'm just going to do some simple modeling. So I'm going to do a cylinder, scale it down, position it, and then I'm just going to add some visual interest. So I'm going to select, I'm going to select, I'm using a new keyboard, and I do not know where the Alt key is. Okay, so I'm going to select a loop, and then I'm just going to scale it up, and then kind of do this. And I expect, or I know, this is the platform we are going to be using for our legs. So just make it look okay. I'm going to take these 2 things and join them together. So this is going to be our base. And then finally, we can talk about the legs. But first, maybe let's animate the top component. So what I'm thinking is we want to have this thing bend, but it's only going, this should not have a parent. Go into the object settings. It's one of these. Object settings, go to parenting or relations, and clear that parent. So now when we bend this, it's only affecting the top. You're going to see it's only going on the y-axis, basically. Or you can actually change it so it's going the other direction. But we only have one plane of motion. That's something I want to fix. So I'm just going to make this animation a bit better. To do this, I'm going to add an empty. And you're thinking, what is he thinking? Why is there an empty? Here's what I'm thinking. We're going to take this, and instead of using an x, y, or z axis, I'm going to use the empty as the origin. What's the point? The point is when we rotate this empty, you can now see we can bend on any dimension. So now if we want to animate this, now that the top part is ready, we can keyframe the angle, so hit I, and now you can see this angle information. By the way, I went to the graph editor, and the reason for that is this is something I want to add noise to. So I'm going to select the angle information from this modifier, and then I'm going to apply a graph editor modifier that's basically going to say noise. And you can see when I do that, what is going to happen, if I can zoom out properly. Again, I'm using a new keyboard, and I don't really know how to use it. There we go. Okay, so you can see what this noise modifier does is it adds some randomness, and now you can see it's doing this. What I want this to do is actually I want to keyframe this at 0, so this kind of shifts it down. And I want to increase the scale so it's going a bit slower, and maybe increase the strength so it can bend a bit more. So now you can see we have this procedural animation. Let's slow it down just a bit, and maybe decrease the strength by a little. And I now want this randomized neck motion to also rotate. So I'm going to select this empty, And since we know rotating it is what we need, I'm going to keyframe the rotation. And then also for this, for the empty, I want to add some noise. Now, I guess we just need to go into the Z rotation because we want to orbit around the Z-axis and add some noise. And now you can see that's shaking. Again, I'm going to increase the gap here and make it way stronger. So now you can see this is rotating a lot more, and the neck is just going all over the place. A bit chaotic, so I'm going to bring down the strength and bring up the top scale. So now, the way you can picture this is it's moving its neck in nice random directions. And because we just use noise for every part of this, it should look pretty organic, okay? Next component, and I'm just going to save this, and bacteriophage. I'm going to make this file available on Patreon, if I can remember. What I want to do is I also want this thing to be able to move. So we're basically building a hierarchy of parents. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these, and then our base, and then I'm going to parent it to the base. Although now we have the issue of that. Let's think. Because this is parented to the neck, maybe we can take the neck and the empty and parent it to the base. Let's see what that does. So now it's still moving, but now we can move the mesh as well. Okay, so I'm building a hierarchy of rigging, basically. Okay, so now we have a thing that we can move and animate the neck of. But the more complicated component, as you can imagine, is making these legs. So let me tell you what I'm thinking. I'm just going to first of all model the leg, and then we're going to worry about rigging it. So I'm going to take a plane, kind of weird place to start, but if you go into edit mode and select everything and hit M, we can merge it at center. What does that mean? It basically means I've condensed the plane into a single, if I can show you, a single vertex that you can see right here. The reason I've done this is now we can hit E to extrude and E to extrude, and this is a way to model the leg. So I'm just going to make that a bit smaller and position it here. And I also want to take this leg, so make sure it's in the right proportions. I want to take this vertex, Control B to bevel with V on vertex. I'm just going to add some smoothing to the leg. Because the idea here is we're going to turn this into a curve to give it that thickness, and then we're going to bring it back into a mesh. A bit convoluted. So take this and convert it into a curve. And now that it's a curve, same thing we did with the spiral, I'm going to add bevel depth to give it actual thickness, so you can see what I'm doing here, and then convert it back to a mesh. The reason I'm doing this is I want to be able to rig and animate it, which I think only works with mesh. Could be wrong there. Okay? So to actually rig this thing, since it's just raw geometry now, we can actually do it the normal way with armatures. So if you've never used armatures before, don't worry, it's simple. We're going to add an armature. You can see it right here. We're going to position it at the base of the leg, and then in edit mode, so hitting tab, there's an edit mode for armatures. I'm just going to take the head of this and position it here. Okay? So that's one bone, and then E to extrude, and that's another bone. So I basically have made an elbow of this. So you want to imagine this is a rig for an arm. Okay? So that's our rig, and I imagine we can start rigging this thing now. So I'm going to take our mesh, shift-click the armature, and we're going to parent, but we're doing a special kind of parent. We're parenting with automatic weights. What that means is this is now attached to the armature, but in a special way, right? So when we go to this armature, and not edit mode, but we go to pose mode, you're going to see what happens now is when we move this, it's going to actually move the leg. Little hard to see. Let me just go into solid mode. You can kind of tell it's moving the leg. What we're ultimately going to do is we're going to hide it so you can't see it. But this is a way to move the leg, and we can rotate it and do all of that. And whatever we do for this leg, we can just copy to the other 5 or 6 legs. So now that we're ready, I'm just going to make a bit of an animation. So I'm going to select everything. I'm going to hit I to keyframe. And I can never remember if it's location or rotation technically, so I'm going to keyframe both of them. And then let's go 5 frames into the future. So I'm just making a very basic animation. 5 frames into the future, let's have this leg extend upwards. So I'm going to select the bone, and I'm going to rotate it so it's facing upwards, and then also move that upwards, and we'll play with that. Take this pose, select everything, and then keyframe the location rotation. So now you can see we have a very basic animation of the leg going up and down. In fact, on the first frame, I want the leg to even go a bit lower. Okay, so here's our animation, and we want this to do it repeatedly. I'm going to go to the timeline. It's a little easier to interpret. So here's our keyframes. I'm going to take these, Control-C, Control-V, and now we've pasted them. So you can see it goes up and back down. Although it seems like I did not select all of them. Okay, I figured out the issue. I just wasn't selecting all the bones. So select all the bones, and then I'm going to take the first keyframe, Control-C, Control-V, and now it goes up and down. Beautiful. So make sure you select all your bones. And this is a motion we want to repeat. So making sure that we like the animation, just going up and down, we can repeat it. So take the last two keyframes, paste them, and you can have this just keep repeating. So I'm going to do it for like 90 or so frames. And we'll make this project 90 frames. So you can see this leg is basically going up and down. Now, of course, this doesn't really make sense contextually on its own, but we're going to add more legs, and then together it should look like it's moving, hopefully. Okay? So that could be it. We could also technically add a bit of noise to this if we wanted to. Let's see what happens. So we add noise. It's going all over the place. Maybe not the best idea. So I'm going to probably leave it there, unless you want to only do this on the quaternion rotations, which you can see makes it a bit more complicated. You know what? Let's do it. So I'm taking this. I'm going to scale it to make it slower, and I'm going to make it less intense, and I'm going to make it even slower, and I'm going to make it even slower. Okay, I think the issue is that we're not editing the other ones. So I'm going to select this one, I'm going to make it slower, select this one, make it slower, and then for this one. So let's see what that looks like. So that looks a bit jank. But if we decrease the amplitude, so the only reason I'm doing this is so that it has a bit more randomization. This should actually add some visual interest. Okay, so now it's not perfectly the same every time. Okay, so we have this, and now all we want to do, make sure to go back to object mode, all we want to do is make more legs that have a bit of a different animation. To do this, select the leg and the armature. Okay, so if you take these and duplicate them, you can see it like moves independently. So make sure to take both and duplicate them, but off of the 3D cursor. The reason I do this is now when I duplicate, I can just rotate it like that. So let me rotate by 45 degrees, and then duplicate, rotate by 45 degrees, and this should make 10? Not sure. It's going to make some amount of legs. It's 360 divided by 45, which is 8. Okay. So I'm just going to keep duplicating these, and hopefully I've done this correctly. We'll see in a moment. Again, I don't know if there's like technically a number that we should be aiming for, but whatever. Rotate by 45. Okay, rotate by negative 45. There we go. Take this, rotate by negative 45. Okay, there we go. So you can see now we have all our legs moving, but it kind of looks weird because they're perfectly in sync. And you might think, oh, now we have to reanimate all of them, but not really. Here's how we do it super quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to expose our armatures, and with an armature selected, you can just shift this a little, and then it will be in a different part of the animation. So you can just randomize this. And if we do this for all of them, you can now see all the legs aren't necessarily moving at the exact same time. And that will make it look a bit more like it's crawling. Again, since you know, we're just going to animate this thing moving. Technically, the front legs go forwards and it kind of drags it along, but I'm just doing a basic animation here. Now we run into the issue of when we move this, it doesn't really move the legs with it, but as you might expect, simple answer. Just take the armatures, not necessarily the legs, but the armatures, and then we are going to connect those. If I can select them, I'm going to connect them to the base. So Control P, and now, literally by just moving the base, we can take this animation with the neck and the legs and move them anywhere, which is beautiful. Okay. Final thing is I want this thing to crawl, and yes, we can animate the base, but I think what would be a bit cleaner is I'm just going to add a empty controller. So I'm going to add a sphere empty. Why a sphere? Just because it looks different. Okay. So I'm going to take the base, parent it to this empty, and now this is our main controller. So super simply, I'm going to delete the keyframes on this. Super simply, I can keyframe the location, and then let's actually make this only 45 frames. And then a couple frames later, I move it down and keyframe the location. And let's see what that looks like. Looks a bit janky. One thing we can do is we can take the interpolation, hit T for interpolation, and set it to linear, so it goes at a constant speed. And I think there's a couple things that make this look wonky. First of all, it's moving too far for the speed of its legs. So I'm just going to move it back a little and then keyframe. So now it's going a bit more at speed. And then it's a bit too consistent. It looks like it's gliding. So this is also something we can control. Since we're animating the y-axis, we go to our y-axis on the graph editor. So basically, this is the tutorial of noise. Go to Y location and add noise, which is just going to modify this a little. And it's going to move it, but it's going to look a bit more janky. And this should add some realism if we don't make it too intense. And we increase the depth, which makes it look a bit noisier. So that already makes it look like it's doing a bit more. So this is without, it's just perfectly gliding, and this is with. Little hard to tell, it's pretty subtle, so we can make it a bit more intense. So I think stuff like that is really going to help. And maybe we can also keyframe the X location, add some randomness to that. So let's see. This way it's going to move back and forth a little. Let's slow that down just so it's not going in a perfectly straight line. And I'm going to decrease the strength of that and make it a bit slower. So you can see now it kind of looks a bit more realistic, right? The last thing I would do to make it look real is I would personalize the animation of the legs so that they're crawling and stuff like that. But I think that looks pretty good. So really the rest of this is rendering. I basically got through what I wanted to get through. So maybe I will not do the rendering, or maybe I'll save that for another part. Because there is a little something extra, right? Like we want to make the scene look good. We still need to make the genetic material inside of here, which means the head needs to be see-through. But if I take this and kind of set up a stage, so I'm just going to bevel these and then shade smooth, we've basically set up a stage. So I'm going to take our panel, get rid of it, and to make this look a bit better, let's see some shadows, and let's see some cavity mapping on both world and screen space. And we just want to make sure that the plane is making contact. Very cool. So now at this point, I'm just going to call this, I think it's behind my webcam, but I'm going to call this bacteriophage, and I'm going to call this controller. And we should just be able to duplicate this. Well, I don't want to duplicate the stage. So actually, this is just called stage. What I can do is I'm going to take everything except the stage, duplicate it, and then as long as I like shift the empty, which I can select the empty for this, I believe. So if I move this right now, it's not going to work because we already added keyframes. But if I increase the delta transform, which means change in transform, I can now have two of them moving, and I can have them move in different directions if I wanted to. But that is the essence of it. So let's just kind of wrap up here. I'm going to add a camera. I'm going to go to camera to view, just so I can, add a bit of something. So let's zoom in, position the camera. And if you don't render in Eevee or Cycles, yes, this is not going to have motion blur or any of those fancy things. But again, I might save rendering for a future tutorial. Last thing, for the shadows, I just want to orient the direction a bit differently. And you can do that like this. Look at that. Any other render settings we care about with the workbench? I don't think so. So we can just enable all of these things. Technically, you can add depth of field and an outline and all kinds of fancy stuff. Okay. Look at that. Now we're rolling. So there you go. That is how you make a bacteriophage animation. Really, you can use this to make spiders or any leggy creatures with some randomization and stuff like that. If people are interested, I'll make a part 2 with the rendering and materials and all that. But there you go, another biological animation. Did you ask for this? No. Did I provide it? Yes. There you go. If you want the blend file for this, or if you just want to support what I do here with these tutorials, me providing them for free on YouTube, join the Patreon. That is the best way to support what I do, because that's a consistent revenue stream monthly that lets me keep making these tutorials at no paywall. And you get access to the blend files, some exclusive tutorials I made in the past, early access. So thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.